My mother-in-law Margaret tried to sell our house. She kept saying, "This house belongs to my son." What she didn't know was that the deed was only in my name, and I had been documenting her illegal attempts for 3 years. When she went to the real estate agent with a fake ID, I called the police. My name is David Martinez. I'm 38 years old, and I'd just witnessed the most elaborate family property theft attempt in domestic legal history transform into the most satisfying criminal prosecution of my mother-in-law's predatory behavior. But what Margaret didn't understand was that trying to steal property from a property attorney wasn't just bold, it was criminally stupid. Standing in the criminal court 6 months after Margaret had been arrested for identity fraud and attempted property theft, watching her receive a 2-year sentence for trying to steal my house, I felt the deep satisfaction of legal expertise triumphing over family manipulation. But according to Margaret's version of our family dynamic, she had been protecting her daughter's inheritance from a manipulative son-in-law. The house that had been the center of our legal battle was a $485,000, 3-bedroom home in suburban Denver that I had purchased entirely with my own money 2 years before marrying Margaret's daughter, Jennifer. To understand how Margaret had been able to convince herself that she could steal property that legally belonged to me, and how I had been able to document her criminal behavior while preparing a comprehensive legal case against her, I need to explain the 3-year campaign of family harassment that had preceded her arrest. Had met Jennifer Coleman in 2015 when we were both in our early 30s and establishing our professional careers. I was a property attorney specializing in real estate law, and Jennifer was a graphic designer for a marketing agency. "I love that you're so independent and successful," Jennifer had told me early in our relationship. "It's impressive that you own your own house at 35. I've been saving and planning since law school," I'd replied. Property ownership has always been important to me, both personally and professionally. I had purchased the house in 2014 using savings from my law practice, a substantial down payment I'd accumulated over 7 years, and a mortgage that was exclusively in my name. The property deed, title insurance, and all legal documentation clearly established my sole ownership. "This is going to be our home together," I had told Jennifer when she'd moved in with me in 2016. I bought it as an investment in our future. Our relationship had been strong, and when we'd gotten engaged in 2017, I had considered adding Jennifer's name to the property deed as a wedding gift. But my first meeting with Margaret Coleman had changed that decision completely. "So you're the lawyer who thinks he's good enough for my daughter," Margaret had said during our initial introduction at a family dinner. "I'm honored that Jennifer wants to marry me," I'd replied diplomatically. "I'm looking forward to being part of your family." "We'll see about that." Jennifer has always been too trusting with men who want to take advantage of her success. Margaret's immediate hostility had been surprising, especially since Jennifer had described her mother as supportive of our relationship. But I had assumed that her protective attitude was normal for a mother meeting her daughter's fiance acute. The first indication that Margaret's hostility was more than typical maternal protectiveness had come during our wedding planning, when she had begun making demands about property ownership and financial arrangements. Jennifer should have her name on the house deed before the wedding, Margaret had told me during a family meeting about wedding preparations. "That's something Jennifer and I will discuss privately," I'd replied. "There's nothing private about property ownership in marriage. If you're really committed to my daughter, you'll make sure she has equal ownership of your assets." "Margaret, property law is my profession. I understand the legal implications of marriage and property ownership. Then you understand that my daughter deserves protection from men who might try to take advantage of her." Margaret's insistence on property ownership issues had been concerning, but Jennifer had assured me that her mother was just being overly cautious about financial security. She's always been worried about my financial independence, Jennifer had explained. She means well, but she can be controlling about money matters. I want you to feel secure in our marriage, I had told Jennifer. If you want your name on the deed, we can arrange that after the wedding. I trust you completely, David. I don't need to own half your house to feel secure in our relationship. Jennifer's trust and independence had been one of the qualities I'd admired most about her, and I'd been grateful that she didn't share her mother's focus on property ownership and financial control. However, what I hadn't anticipated was that Margaret's interest in our property ownership wasn't about protecting Jennifer. It was about positioning herself to control family assets. The wedding had proceeded smoothly despite Margaret's continued complaints about property ownership, but the real problems had begun during our honeymoon, when Margaret had used our absence to conduct what she described as a security inspection of our house. I wanted to make sure everything was safe while you were gone, Margaret had explained when we'd returned to find that she'd been in our home for several days. How did you get inside? I'd asked. Jennifer gave me a spare key for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency, Margaret. You should have asked permission before entering our home. This is my daughter's home now. I have a responsibility to make sure she's living in a safe environment. Margaret's assumption that Jennifer's marriage had given her access rights to my property had been the first clear indication that she fundamentally misunderstood legal, property ownership, and marriage law. The second concerning incident had occurred 3 months after our wedding, when I discovered that Margaret had been researching property ownership records and had contacted my mortgage company to inquire about adding Jennifer's name to the loan. Why are you calling my mortgage company? I'd asked Margaret directly, because Jennifer should be protected financially. If something happens to you, she could lose her home. Jennifer doesn't need to be on the mortgage to inherit the property. I have a will that provides for her completely. Wills can be contested. Property ownership is more secure than inheritance. Margaret, I'm a property attorney. I understand estate planning better than most people. Then you should understand that my daughter deserves equal property rights in her marriage. Margaret's persistent focus on property ownership had been inappropriate and invasive, but I had assumed that clear communication about legal realities would resolve her concerns. The third incident had been more serious. In 2018, I had discovered that Margaret had been telling neighbors and family members that she was a co-owner of our property and had been making decisions about landscaping and exterior maintenance without consulting Jennifer or me. Margaret hired a landscaping company to redo our front yard. Jennifer had told me when I'd arrived home to find construction work in progress. She what? This is our property. She can't authorize work on our house. She said she wanted to help improve our home value as a wedding gift. She can't make unilateral decisions about our property, and she certainly can't enter into contracts that affect our house. I had been forced to contact the landscaping company to explain that Margaret had no authority to authorize work on my property, and I had to pay a cancellation fee to terminate the contract she'd signed using my address. This is harassment. I had told Jennifer after resolving the landscaping issue. Your mother is acting like she owns our house. She's just trying to be helpful in her own way. Jennifer, this isn't helpful. It's legally problematic and financially costly. Can you try to be patient with her? She's having trouble adjusting to the fact that I'm married and living independently. Jennifer's request for patience had been reasonable, but Margaret's behavior had been escalating rather than improving, and I had begun to suspect that her interest in our property went beyond maternal concern. The investigation I had begun documenting. Margaret's activities had revealed that her behavior constituted a systematic campaign to establish property rights that she didn't legally possess. Working with a private investigator I'd hired to monitor Margaret's activities, I had discovered that she had been researching property ownership laws had consulted with multiple attorneys about property rights, and had been developing a strategy to claim ownership interest in my house. Your mother-in-law has been meeting with attorneys about property inheritance and elder rights. Private investigator Lisa Chun had reported after 3 months of surveillance. She's been telling people that she has ownership interest in your property. What kind of ownership interest? She's claiming that because her daughter lives in the house, she has contributed to the property's value and deserves legal recognition. As a partial owner, that's completely false. She's never contributed financially to the property, and marriage doesn't automatically create property ownership for in-laws. She's also been researching adverse possession laws and has been documenting her presence on your property as evidence of occupation and maintenance. Margaret's research into adverse possession laws had been particularly concerning because it suggested that she was developing a legal strategy to claim ownership of property that didn't belong to her. But the most shocking discovery had been that Margaret had been creating false documentation to support her property ownership claims. She's been creating fake receipts for property improvements and maintenance, Chun had continued. She's building a paper trail that she thinks will support a legal claim to partial ownership. This is fraud. She's creating false documents to support a fraudulent property claim. Exactly. And she's been telling real estate professionals that she's authorized to make decisions about the property. The evidence Chun had compiled included photographs of Margaret's fake receipts, recordings of her conversations with contractors and real estate professionals, and documentation of her meetings with attorneys about property rights. However, Margaret's most serious crime had been her attempt to actually sell my property, using fraudulent documentation and false identity claims, the trap I had set for. Margaret had been based on my understanding of her escalating behavior and her inability to resist opportunities to assert control over property she didn't own. Working with local real estate agents and law enforcement, I had created a situation where Margaret's illegal activities would be documented and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We're going to give Margaret an opportunity to commit a crime that's so obvious that even she won't be able to explain it away. I had told my attorney while preparing the evidence package. The bait had been a casual conversation where Jennifer had mentioned to Margaret that we were considering selling the house and moving to a larger property. If you ever decide to sell, I should be involved in the decision, Margaret had told Jennifer. This property affects the entire family. David owns the house, Mom. Any decisions about selling would be his to make. I've contributed to the property's value through improvements and maintenance. I should have a say in major decisions. You haven't contributed financially to the property, and you don't have legal ownership rights. We'll see about that. Margaret's response had been exactly what I'd expected, and within 2 weeks, she had contacted 3 different real estate agents, claiming to be authorized to sell my property. I need to sell this house due to family circumstances, Margaret had told real estate agent Karen Williams, using false identification and forged documentation. Are you listed as an owner on the property deed? Yes, this is a family property, and I'm authorized to handle the sale. I'll need to see official documentation of your ownership and authorization. Margaret had provided Williams with falsified documents that claimed to establish her ownership interest in my property, not realizing that I had already alerted local real estate professionals about potential fraud attempts. Mrs. Coleman, I need to verify this documentation with the county recorder's office, Williams had told Margaret. There seemed to be some discrepancies in the ownership records. There are no discrepancies. I'm the legal owner, and I want to list this property immediately. Williams had immediately contacted me to report Margaret's attempted fraud, exactly as I had arranged with multiple real estate agencies in advance. The arrest I had been preparing for over a year had finally occurred when Margaret had returned to Williams' office with additional falsified documents and had attempted to sign a listing agreement using false identification. Margaret Coleman, You're under arrest for identity fraud, attempted property theft, and falsification of legal documents. Detective Robert Martinez had announced as Margaret had been attempting to finalize the fraudulent property listing. This is ridiculous. I'm selling my family's property. Ma'am, you have no legal ownership of this property. You're attempting to sell someone else's house using false documentation. My son-in-law stole this property from my daughter. I'm protecting my family's interests. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Margaret's arrest had been both satisfying and sad. Satisfying because her criminal behavior had finally been stopped, but sad because it had destroyed any possibility of family reconciliation. The criminal trial had been swift and decisive. The evidence I had accumulated over 3 years had been overwhelming, and Margaret's attorney had been unable to provide any legitimate explanation for her criminal activities. Mrs. Coleman, you systematically attempted to steal property worth nearly $500,000, Judge Patricia Williams had said during sentencing. You created false documents, used fraudulent identification, and attempted to sell property that you knew didn't belong to you. Your Honor, I was trying to protect my daughter's interests. By committing multiple felonies? This court finds your actions to be premeditated and systematic fraud. Margaret was sentenced to 2 years in state prison and ordered to pay $25,000 in restitution for legal fees and investigation costs. She was also issued a permanent restraining order, preventing her from contacting me or approaching my property. But for Jennifer and me, Margaret's conviction had been only the beginning of a difficult healing process. Jennifer had been devastated to learn that her mother had been systematically planning to steal our home while lying to our family for years. I can't believe she was planning this for so long, Jennifer had said after the trial. She was lying to all of us while pretending to be concerned about family welfare. Your mother has serious psychological problems related to control and property ownership, I had replied. This wasn't about protecting you. It was about her need to control family assets. How do we move forward from this? We focus on our marriage and our future, and we make sure that legal boundaries are clearly established and enforced. The family recovery had been challenging, but Jennifer and I had been able to strengthen our relationship by working through the trauma of Margaret's betrayal together. 2 years after Margaret's conviction, Jennifer and I had purchased a larger home and had started a family, while Margaret had been released from prison and was living in a supervised housing facility, with no contact with our family. Sometimes family members can be the most dangerous threats to your security. I had reflected while reviewing the legal protections we'd established for our new property. The mother-in-law, who had thought she could steal my house by claiming family property rights, had learned that property law doesn't recognize emotional manipulation or fraudulent documentation. Sometimes the people who think they understand your legal vulnerabilities discover that you understand the law better than they realize. And sometimes the most important, protection against family manipulation is comprehensive documentation and the willingness to prosecute criminal behavior, even when it comes from people who are supposed to love and support you. Margaret Coleman had spent 3 years developing an elaborate plan to steal my property, never realizing that I had been documenting every aspect of her criminal behavior, while preparing a legal case that would send her to prison.